Hello, everyone. It's so great to see so many people here. And I'm glad so many came out this evening, and clearly all of you got the right link and were able to get in. Sorry if you had any difficulties at first. Feel free to put where you're coming in from in the chat while we're still admitting people, and we'll get started in just a minute. I love seeing where people come from. We've got New Hampshire and Florida and California and New York and Vermont. I haven't seen any international yet, but there will be. So just a little bit about if you're new to the Poets Corner. The Poets Corner was founded in June of 2020 by myself and my dear friend Catherine Seitz, who, because of health reasons, is no longer involved. But we were sheltered in, as most people were, in June of 2020, and we wanted more community. We wanted to create community around our writing. So we created the Poets Corner and invited friends and family and invited them to invite others and started hosting readings once a month on Zoom. And today we have more than 4,500 people from all around the world on our mailing list. And we host monthly readings, such as the one you're here for today, although our events are usually on Sunday afternoons. And this is unusual to be on a Wednesday evening, but they're always free and recorded and available on our website after the event. But before I introduce today's reading, I want to tell you about a couple of upcoming events on the Poets Corner. On Sunday afternoon, June 23rd, the poet Marie Howe will be hosting our reading for our 2024 chapbook competition winner, Molly Bolton. Molly's chapbook is called What Blooms in the Dark, and it's a beautiful collection with poems that wander through the Blue Ridge Mountains, contemplating her grief over losing a child and finding sustenance and renewal in nature. Molly's chapbook was chosen by Marie Howe from among 10 finalists that were selected by our readers from over 400 entries into the competition. The other 9 finalists will be here for a reading on Sunday, July 14th, so we hope you'll come back for that. And then in September, we're hosting Ross Gay live and in person in Camden, Maine, for those of you who don't know where I'm based. But it's on September 28th on a Saturday. But the craft doc on Saturday afternoon will be available on Zoom. And that's a fee of $25, but you can sign up if you're interested on thepoetscorner.org. So there's an interesting connection between that event and tonight's reading. And that's Ross Gay's poem, A Small Needful Fact. That's the opening poem in this beautiful anthology, Leaning Toward Light. And I'd like to read that first before I introduce Tess Taylor to lead us through the rest of tonight's program. A small needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for the Parks and Rec Horticultural Department, which means perhaps that with his very large hands, perhaps in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants which, most likely, Some of them, in all likelihood, continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe. You probably know this, but may have forgotten since Garner's death was in July of 2015. He was a big man, 6'2" and 395 pounds. And at 43 years old, he was detained in a chokehold by the Staten Island police. And his final words were, "I can't breathe." When Tess told me she was editing an anthology of garden poems, I had no idea that it would become such a beautifully designed book. And I've got the blur on. You might not be able to see it, but we'll put it in the chat. It's just gorgeous with a compendium of amazing poets, but also that it would give us so many ways to understand the role of gardens, not only the plants in our backyards, but also in the lives of people like Eric Garner, the hands that tend the gardens. My husband Roger surprised me with a copy of the book as the gift, knowing how much I admire and appreciate Tess. I've taken several workshops with her after reading her book, Rift Zones, which layers the geology of place with cultural history, with personal experience and insight. It's the geology that drew me in because if you know me, I'm obsessed with volcanoes and geology. But it's the complexity of the layering that kept me intrigued and always wanting more. Tess's body of work deals with place, ecology, memory, and cultural reckoning. She's published 5 poetry collections, and this anthology of garden poems came out in August of 2023. I don't know where Tess gets her energy to tend a garden, a family, students, and write, and she seems to have energy to spare. So Tess will introduce the anthology and the wonderful poets who have joined us tonight on the Poets' Corner. So please join me in a very warm welcome for Tess Taylor.
Wow, Meg, thanks for that amazing introduction. Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be sharing a beautiful spring evening with everyone here. I'm in awe that you're here with us on a night like tonight, and I hope the air wherever you are smells like something growing. Um, Meg mentioned that this in some ways was a project that came together during the pandemic. A friend who knew me from my time when I worked on a farm in the Berkshires called me and she said, "I have an idea for you." And I said, "What is it?" And she said, "I want there to be a collection of contemporary gardening poetry for this moment when we're dealing with questions of food justice and racial justice and the idea of why we tend the earth in a moment when perhaps we're also grieving it. And how do those things all fit together?" And the timing couldn't have been better because I literally had dirt under my fingernails and I was gardening furiously um, in the front yard, which is where we get our sun. It's a tiny front yard. We garden all the way along, even between the little piece of land between the sidewalk and the street. Um, but at that time, people were coming and forming this sort of ad hoc community around this front yard garden, standing, chatting at a distance, creeping close to put down a tomato plant, sharing some wisdom about how to get shiitake mushrooms in a shady spot. And I realized that there was this beautiful thing that I believe about gardens, which is I believe that they build diversity from the soil to the pollinators to the communities that they serve, that they are spaces of invitation and repair. And I realized that I believe that about the art world as well. And so when my friend told me she had this idea, I couldn't believe that I had the chance to do it. And I said yes. Um, and it's been such a joy. All of these poets who you're going to hear tonight are some of our moment's most distinguished poets. I was, in awe of how many of our moment's most distinguished poets are also gardeners. There's obviously some congruence there, which maybe we can talk about later. We have David Baker, who's the editor of 20 books, including Whale Fall from W. W. Norton in 2022. Um, he has a gazillion honors, but he just became a professor emerita from Denison University, as well as, and he has been the poetry editor of the Kenyon Review. Sophie Cabot Black had her first poetry collection, The Misunderstanding of Nature, received the Poetry Society of America's first book award, and her poetry has appeared widely in many magazines, including the Atlantic Monthly, the New Republic, and the New Yorker. And she has an amazing book that's at once sensual and sort of cerebral, and it's also very much about farming. It's called The Geometry of the Restless Herd. You can check it out from Copper Canyon. Um, Mark Doty is praised by the New York Times for his dazzling tactile grasp of the world. And he is a poet who many of us had admired for so many years. One of the great joys of publishing this anthology is getting to be friends with Mark enough to get pictures of his beautiful farm in upstate New York, which he is working on. And some of the names of his books include What is the Grass by W. W. Norton and Deep Lane, also by W. W. Norton. He is just a fabulous poet of the senses. Kirun Kapur's book, Women in the Waiting Room, was a finalist for the National Poetry Series and published by Black Lawrence Press. She teaches at Amherst College, where she is the director of the creative writing program. And I had the joy of reading with her at something at Amherst College called the Book and Plow Farm, which brings together sensing, college education and farming all in one place. So that she is here with us. Danusha Laméris, who contributed a fabulous poem about worms, which we will hear later, is a poet and essayist. Her first book, The Moons of August, was chosen by Naomi Shahib Nye as the winner of the Autumn House Poetry Press Prize. And she has an incredible new book, Blade by Blade, coming out from Copper Canyon Press on September 10th, 2024. Be ready. Be ready. Is that still the date? I hope so. Yeah. Um, and then I guess it's me. I'm the last in the alphabet. What will happen in a minute is I will read an opening poem, and these beautiful poets will be reading 2 or 3 poems in alphabetical order by last name. And we'll come to the end. I'll read you a few poems, and then we'll have a chance to think and talk about poetry and gardening. Um, if at any point you're interested in buying the book, my local bookstore, Pegasus Books in Berkeley, would love to actually take an email from you, to have you have it signed to whoever you'd like, and we'll ship it to you right away. But basically, it's spring, and this book came out in August, and it's so delightful to share this book in a new season with an incredible group gathered by Meg, who's really one of the great impresarios. Um, and I'm so honored and delighted to have this moment with you. Um, I often begin by reading Ross's poem. That poem means a lot to me. It means a lot to remember that plants and beautiful places and oxygen and the dignity of life matter to every single person on this planet. The abundance of pollinators, the abundance of food, our connection to each other. But I'll just read 3 short haiku by a wonderful California poet named Rosemary Waltola Trummer. 3 sunflower seeds. Before I push the dark seeds into the dirt, preparing the dirt, waiting for a beginning, roomfuls of gold. Patience, I say to the empty vase, my heart. David, will you start us off?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'll get started here with the poem and just quickly say one thing to start, all of us poets, with a thank you to Tess Taylor. I know a lot of poets who work very hard at their work. I know a lot of citizens who work very hard at living well in the world. Tess is one of those people for whom both of those characterizations are vivid and active. This is a poem of mine called Pocket Garden in the City. You would miss it if you were hurrying, if you were harried or the day was drab. It's tucked between 2 old brownstones, now a defunct pet store, a pop-up for sneakers. Take the stone path back. It's so narrow, the leaning greenery like sticky sleeves. Sunflower above, like a lighthouse, the ocean aroma of yellow hibiscus. But what are they doing? 2 cops in the back corner under a lime tree, hooded figure between them. What's your name? You stand there, and they stand there. Snapdragon, hollyhock, daylilies ablaze. I saw a comment pop up that someone couldn't hear. Is this audible? Are people getting this? Yes, I guess so.
I think we can hear. I think that might be
Okay.
personal issue, computer.
I'll read 2 more poems then. I'm going to read a kind of big, full poem by C.D. Wright, and then I'm going to read a tiny little poem by Ilya Kaminsky. This is C.D. Wright's poem, Song of the Gourd. In gardening, I continued to sit on my side of the car, to drive whenever possible at the usual level of distraction. In gardening, I shat nails, glass, contaminated dirt, and threw up on the new shoots. In gardening, I learned to praise things I had dreaded. I pushed the hair out of my face. I felt less responsible for one man's death, one woman's long-term isolation. My bones softened. In gardening, I lost nickels and ring settings. I uncovered buttons and marbles. I lay half the worm aside and sought the rest. I sought myself in the bucket and wondered why I came into being in the first place. In gardening, I turned away from the television and went around smelling of offal and inedible parts of the chicken. In gardening, I said, Excelsior. In gardening, I required no company. I had to forgive my own failure to perceive how things were. I went out bare-legged at dusk and dug and dug and dug. I hit rock. My ovaries softened. In gardening, I was protean, as in no other realm before or since. I longed to torch my old belongings and belch a little flame of satisfaction. In gardening, I longed to stroll farther into soundlessness. I could almost forget what happened many swift years ago in Arkansas. I felt like a god from down under, Thonian. In garden, I thought, this is my body and soul. I am home at last. Excelsior. Praise the grass. In gardening, I fled the fold that supported the war. In gardening, could I stop shrieking? Stop. Stop the slaughter. Only in gardening could I press my ear to the ground to hear my soul let out an unyielding noise. My lines softened. I turned the water onto the joy-filled boy child. Only in gardening did I feel fit to partake, to go on trembling in the last light. I confess the abject urge to weed your beds, while the bittersweet overwhelmed my daylilies. I summoned the courage to grin. I climbed the hill with my bucket and slept like a dipper in the cool of your body, besotted with growth, shot through by green. That's C.D. Wright. That's how you do that. Here's one more quick one. This is Ilya Kaminsky. I confess I am really fond of the little bitty poems. After her funeral, I became an environmentalist. I love the planet because my mother is in it. I lie down and kiss the earth's pink, balding forehead. Thank you, everybody, and thanks, Tess. And I'm really eager to hear Sophie Cabot Black now.
Hi, David. Hi, all. That was wonderful. Thank you for that reading. And thank you, Tess and Meg, for putting this together. It's kind of sad that this is the last reading of this book. It's been a great journey reading it throughout the seasons. Thank you for putting it in the world. The first poem I wanted to read was Federico Garcia Lorca's August. August, the opposing of peach and sugar, and the sun inside the afternoon like the stone in the fruit. The ear of corn keeps its laughter intact, yellow and firm. August, the little boys eat brown bread and delicious moon. And this is one of 2 Tom Gunn poems in the book, Considering the Snail. The snail pushes through a green night, for the grass is heavy with water, and meets over the bright path he makes where rain has darkened the earth's dark. He moves in a wood of desire, pale antlers barely stirring as he hunts. I cannot tell what power is at work, drenched there with purpose, knowing nothing. What is a snail's fury? All I think is that if later I parted the blades above the tunnel and saw the thin trail of broken white across litter, I would never have imagined the slow passion in that deliberate progress. And then I'll read my contribution to this wonderful anthology, The Garden. Even by the gate, we could not see the rose. Only gaunt stalks, the paving stones upturned, the reach of wild cherry, beech, and ash over the rusted post as if to claim whatever rises as their own. Who moves first decides. Clear the root, the withered stem, the slash to burn next season. Stakes of names and faded packets piled, cast out by the entrance as the plow waits for us to make sense of each original harrow, tamp, or hardened mound. This year will be better. The mole and crow, each to their corner, as the horse turns to watch you deep in the dirt, to start with the one good and simple seed. Thank you.
So the poets
It's yes, like the poets in this book, and the authors of the poems that are not, the poets who are not here to read, are such great company right now. After 21 years in New York City, I moved to the farm upstate that Tess mentioned, and in March, even the middle of March, towards the end of March, we were still in this frozen, empty waiting space, and then April happened. The most explosive, ferocious, passionate, gorgeous thing. And what good company these poems are to help witness that. So anybody who has ever ordered anything from a gardening catalog, or maybe even thought about ordering anything, has then received more catalogs and more catalogs. Yes, the seed catalogs, the plant catalogs, they come year after year. And one of these that came to me was a book, collection of bearded iris, which are among the most hybridizable things there are, and also the most lurid in the colors that are created by hybridizers. They're really intense, and they had often dramatic names. So there was one solid black iris in this book, which was called Anvil of Darkness. And I was just struck with that name, but I also thought, would you really want to grow the Anvil of Darkness? Would you buy the Anvil of Darkness and bring it into your garden? So at first that was a kind of joke. And then as I thought more and more about the digging that we do, the going down again and again, going face down to the earth, that term became more and more appropriate, thinking about what it is we're reaching down to. This poem remembers my late friend Deborah Diggs, marvelous poet. Deep Lane. When I'm down on my knees, pulling up wild mustard by the roots before it sets seed, hauling the old ferns further into the shade, I'm talking to the Anvil of Darkness. Break table, slab no blow could dent, rung with the making, and out of that chop and rot comes the fresh surf of the lupins. When the shovel digs into white root flesh, into the meat coursing with cool water, when I'm grubbing on my knees, what is the hammer? Dusky skin of the tuber, naked worms right on the soil, every letter, my companion blind, all day we go digging, harrowing, rooting deep, spade plunge and trowel, sweet turn down gas flame, slow charring carbon, out of which sprouts the wild unsayable. Beauty's the least of it. You get ready, like Deborah, who used to garden in the dark, hauling out candles and a tall glass of what she said was tea, and digging and reading and studying in the dirt. She'd bring a dictionary. If study is prayer, she said, I'm praying. If you've already gone down to the anvil, if you've rested your face on that adamant, maybe you're already changed. And surely, the greatest accompanist, the person you want to walk hand in hand with as you face that darkness, is this poet, Walt Whitman. This is the ending of Song of Myself. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds, it coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks in the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt and I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me, at first keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere, waiting for you. And now we will hear from, who's after me? I'm not sure.
That's me.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Kirun, and thank you so much. That was beautiful. Thanks to Tess and Poets Corner and to all of you for being here. It's a joy to be here after such a wet and long winter, talking about the spring and the things that are growing. I can see them right from my window. Actually, the peonies bloomed today for the first time, so I'm glad I get to share them with you. I'm going to start with a poem that's about gardens and connections. I think it first appeared in a collaborative chapbook of epistolary poems about gardens between the poet friends Aimee Nezhukumatathil and Roske. This is Spring by Aimee Nezhukumatathil. No shadows here, only mud. Praise the caked up trowel, hand rake, and glass scissor. I want to kiss each crumble of sun-baked earth as my sons welcome iris, and drunk ants whirl rush over each juicy peony bud. After warm rains come the spring peepers, shivering out of the mud, sitting half in and half out of a puddle. You must know the bees have come early this year too. I see them visit aster, sweet williams, bleeding hearts, and azalea blossoms, hardy enough not to have crisped after the last late frost. Whatever light bees give off after the last snow, I hold it up to you now. I cannot explain the click step of beetles. You're on your own for that. I grew up with patience for soil and stars, lace and pyrite. I believe in an underworld littered with gems. In another life, I have to. Sometimes I lose track of all the bees and their singing. You thought I said stinging. This next poem is one that's been on my mind a lot by the wonderful Naomi Shihab Nye. Palestine Vine. Seeds wrapped tenderly in plastic. One package said white, one red. Hand-lettered, mailed by friends I never met. They grew instantly, strangely confining themselves to one corner of a metal container, as if a metaphor. I swear I planted them all over. Leafy vines popped forth, glory and green lengthening overnight. I didn't notice one had twined around the rungs of a table. Today, moving the pot, the biggest vine ripped out, broke off. No, how could I have missed the simple wrapping of the tendril, suggesting happiness in this exact light? Its roots remain, a broken stem. I wasn't evil, but I wasn't careful. This is what happens in the world. Now soaking snipped vine in a glass of water, feeling the hope and weight of so many years. I'll finish with my own poem in this anthology, which is about the creatures that call us to the garden and to live, to the grackle. Indecent bird, lovely as an oil slick with wings. You've called me to the summer garden. Tin cans of light are crashing through the pear tree. Trash, umbel, globe, and bract. Come kiss my ass. That's how you sound, how you, rash bird, can lure me. Can I keep coming back to this garden if I'm called? There's a man I love and a boy who will be a man, whose bones I still feel click and thrash, where I put my arms around him just this morning. The lash of your voice tells me I should call my loves while I can, to listen to the grackles croak and clack in a nest built with half a ramen cup. They tumble out into the yard. For a moment, two tall figures stand twitching like the stuck hands of a clock. Then, crude slash of sound, boy or man or you bird, sends them, swooping and dashing through panicles, perennials, old blackberry canes. Let it always be this way. Noise, summoning, mustering us together to search out the brash mother who curses and flashes her wings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirun. And I didn't know how much I needed to be here today. This is just so beautiful. And I'm so grateful. I'm just messing with my screen a little to move it. Forgive me. But singing or stinging of that bee, and then whose bones I feel click and thrash in that grackle poem. Just sort of some of the little seeds I'm carrying with me. And especially today, because I was stung by a bee actually on my way to come do this reading. And one of my first thoughts was, oh, that's so appropriate. You know, I think it was a wasp because I couldn't find the stinger in me or the bee. But just that little kiss on the hand, which luckily I took Benadryl for, and all is well. But I did mean to give that caveat that I am on Benadryl. I have been noticing lately when we do things that are ancient. And I just felt hearing all of you poets read and looking at the faces of us gathered here today, that this is something that people would do thousands of years ago and maybe reciting by heart. But to recite in some way the things that pertain to the earth and to the heart is an ancient thing to do, even though we're doing it in these little boxes. I honor the long trajectory of a gathering like this and am so grateful for it in these difficult times. So thank you also to Poets Corner and to Tess. Tess, just a big crowning achievement here to have created this and brought it so gracefully into the world as well. For this past year, wow, what a journey. I'm gonna read just a couple short poems, and the first is a Czesław Miłosz, and I chose this poem because it's how I've been feeling lately. And I thought about what Meg just said, introducing the first poem read this evening, Ross's poem. You probably know this, but you may have forgotten. And I think we should put that above every poem. You probably know this, but you may have forgotten, right? When a poem takes us somewhere, it's something we go, oh, I knew that. I just forgot. So here it is, Gift. A day so happy, fog lifted early. I worked in the garden. Hummingbirds were stopping over honeysuckle flowers. There was no thing on earth I wanted to possess. I knew no one worth my envying him. Whatever evil I had suffered, I forgot. To think that once I was the same man did not embarrass me. In my body, I felt no pain. When straightening up, I saw the blue sea and sails. Love that poem. And that was me earlier today, right after the bee sting. I looked up and I saw the blue sea and sails and was grateful to really see them. Sometimes we see them, but we don't see them. I'm going to read this poem, Feeding the Worms, that Tess mentioned. I like to say this poem was born on Earth Day, where I went to an Earth Day event in a park with my husband. And some very eager people handed me a yogurt container, like one of those plastic yogurt containers, but it was filled with red wriggler worms. And they were just so excited to give me these worms. And I was not as deep into my years of gardening as I am now. And I was like, I don't want to be like the worm people. I turned to my husband and said, do you see the worm people? Don't let me be like that. Because they were just so overly excited about worms. People, let me tell you, I'm so excited about worms. And it's hard not to be when they save your plants and make things amazing, and they do it all by just pooping. It's incredible. Anyway, here's this poem. Ever since I found out that earthworms have taste buds all over the delicate pink strings of their bodies, I pause, dropping apple peels into the compost bin. Imagine the dark, writhing ecstasy, the sweetness of apples permeating their pores. I offer beets and parsley, avocado and melon, the feathery tops of carrots. I'd always thought theirs a menial life, eyeless and hidden, almost vulgar. Though now it seems they bear a pleasure so sublime, so decadent. I want to contribute however I can, forgetting a moment my place on the menu. Everybody. I think I was the last poet reading, so on to, no,
I get to read.
oh, Tess, you do it.
I do. I'm gonna, because my name is after yours in the alphabet.
I love it.
I thought I would read some of the delightful short poems of the book, and then we could have a Q&A. There's a beautiful poet based in Mississippi named Anne Fisher Worth, and she has a 3-line poem that I'm going to read called Hikitas. And that is a Latin word that means thisness. Hic haec hoc is Latin for this. And the so Hikitas is the thisness. For the tomato is an orb of holy light, for its seeds are the defenders of heaven. For if the vine grow freely, it will scale the vault of the stars. For the tomato is an orb of holy light, for its seeds are the defenders of heaven. For if the vine grow freely, it will scale the vault of the stars. Thank you, poets, for being here. Thank you, gardeners, for being here. Thank you, worm people, for being here. Enthusiastic. Thank you, Danusha, for that. I'll read another very short one by Forrest Gander, who I had the fun of running into last night here in Berkeley. It's a little snippet from Just Tell Them No. Field flecked purple with nightshade and lupin, ruby-throated bird at the bottle brush bloom. One's own mediocrity sharpens it. It feels like it's going to be summer soon, and where we are, we just got the first apricot, but we did not yet get the first peach. And so we're all waiting for that moment. I'm going to read Ellen Bass's poem, Ode to the First Peach. I often teach this poem as the way to start small and turn a corner and find yourself in the cosmos. You may listen for that and enjoy savoring that as well, or you may just get very hungry. Ode to the First Peach. Only one insect has feasted here. A clear stub of resin plugs the scar, and the hollow where the stem was severed shines with juice. The fur still silvered like a caul. Even in the next minute, the hairs will darken, turn more golden on my palm. Heavier this flesh than you would imagine, like the sudden weight of a newborn. Oh, what a marriage of citron and blush. It could be a planet reflected through a hall of mirrors, or what a swan becomes when a fairy shoots it from the sky at dawn. At the beginning of the world, when the first dense pith was ravished, and the stars were not yet lustrous coins fallen from the pockets of night, who could have dreamed this would be curried from the chaos? Scent of morning and sugar, bruise and hunger, silent, swollen, clefted life, remnant always remaking itself out of that first flaming ripeness. That tomato poem was by Anne Fisher-Worth. And I'm going to close with my offering, or one of my offerings to this anthology, which is in its way a tomato poem and also a kind of ode. Bob Hass, the great poet, says that the ode is an attempt to establish right relation with something around us in the world. Praise as a form of right relation, attention as a form of right relation. This audience is from everywhere. Some of you are Southerners. Maybe you are people who save your green tomatoes and savor them as a thing that you get from being a gardener. You can't buy them in the store. They're just one of the pleasures of having a relationship with a plant. And they are a delicacy, fried green tomatoes being only one of them. And I think also another sad truth is that probably wherever you are, you know what I mean when I say fire season, especially because I live in California, just near an oil refinery. So this poem I'm going to close with before we have a chat. I hope you'll stay and talk some more with us about poems and gardening. This poem is called Green Tomatoes in Fire Season. There's smoke in the air when I go pick them. I go despite panic, also because inside I'll make chutney. For an hour or so, I unlatch them. It is late fall. They will not ripen. Firm, pale green skins, fine coated in ash. Our fire season goes all autumn now, though today's fire is not yet near to us. But the green tomatoes, I love their pale lobes. Tonight, God willing, we will fry some with cornmeal and fish. Inside the air purifier whirs. I will boil them with molasses and raisin, jar them for friends and for the winter. Disaster, we say, meaning bad star. These are good green stars. This is also their season. Mask on, I bend and bend to the vine. I bend and salvage what I can. Thank you so much. Danusha, Karen, David, Mark, Sophie, Meg.
Thank you, Tess, and all of you. Those were such beautiful poems. And, you know, I'm looking at the peonies in Danusha's background and that Kirun mentioned, and they're just about to burst in Maine. They're not quite out yet. So, and I don't think we ever get to peach season up here. But so many beautiful poems and things. And I thought that, you know, first of all, to those of you who have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and I will monitor the chat and try to relay them to Tess or others. If they're to somebody specific or if they're general, just let me know. But maybe we could just start out talking about, you know, how often you write about gardens and what is that connection between gardening and poetry? What does that mean for you? And anybody who would like to jump in.
Well, I think I'd love everybody to field that one. And I have big answers about why gardens and poetry provide similar experiences, that we get to partake in miniature of something very dense and rich. In a garden, you partake in and steward some of the seasons of life. You see them, you feel them, you are acutely aware of what season it is. The blackberries across the street have a life, and in their life, in this year, they're only just beginning to be ripe, and I see them, I'm close to them, I'm aware of my own life. And in a poem, you get the chance to take part in the dense, beautiful, ongoing life of language, which came before you and will outlive you, and has a pleasure to be savored. And you get to be in the garden of language for a minute. And so, but I think creatively, honestly, I just go into the garden because I calm down and pay attention, and I realize it's not all about me, and that it's bigger than, you know, it's both something I want and something that's bigger than me. And I have a chance to be in grief and in delight. I'm always surprised. I'm always surprised in the garden. So, would somebody else like to say something about gardening and poetry that matters to them?
Sure. Language goes on and 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 on, and poetry takes it and shapes it and compresses it. Nature goes on and 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 on, but sometimes we measure it in a garden that's got not one or two, but three sides, four sides, like a poem, and gridded and measured and intensified. Um, so that's a sort of formal answer, maybe. It's something about that compressed, intense, counted out, organized, organized chaos, but organized nature.
You haven't seen my garden, David.
Actually, I could pick it up from there because I feel like both Tess and David have introduced two parts that I very much feel about my garden, which is actually in the same spot since for over 6 decades, I've worked this plot with garden, different versions of gardening with my mother, my childhood, my friends, my desire to be a witch and do spells. I used to bury things out there. But what I do love is the surprises that a garden, the informality of what you don't know you're going to get when you go back out there, either to weed or after a bad storm or after a winter, what's still standing and what isn't standing and what's coming back and what's volunteering and what didn't make it. And I'm reminded too, and I'm sure you all, I know Mark has been a part of this conversation. Stanley Kunitz built his garden out of literally nothing, out of dunes, out of sand, out in Provincetown. And he worked very, very hard on it. And he would have all of us go grab seaweed and cover it for the winter. He would have us check on it throughout the year and sort of cover it in the fall and the winter. And there were always these surprises that came back in the late spring and early summer. And it was almost like we were leaving little gifts and he was leaving us little gifts. I mean, there wasn't anything to be gotten out of it. It was just the visual of it and the feeling that we were participating in something that was, again, bigger than ourselves, formalized in the sense that we knew there were rows there somewhere, but we had no idea what was going to come back and what interesting new combinations were going to end up together. And what insect had eaten what and what animal had eaten what, which is always an issue in my garden in Connecticut.
So a month ago, I became a beekeeper, and this has been an amazing adventure. There's the hive, and it's closed except for, you know, the little entrance and the bees going in and out, and they're very industrious. From the very beginning, they knew what they needed to do, and off they went to find pollen and nectar and come back again. And because it's sealed, you know, I don't know what's happening in there, except that once a week we open it to inspect the frames and look inside, and the population has doubled. And then there are more and there are more. We have thousands of bees now, and they are, when you look at them, they're doing something together, very purposeful and very intense, that I do not have any words for what they're doing. You know, I could import some from the bee book, but it doesn't touch the reality of my perception of this incredible, luminous, huge communal event of life that's going on there. This has been the most wonderful thing, because it feels like a different kind of education and life force. Like, here is this burgeoning, thriving life that's going out and gathering and building and making more and more of itself. It's thrilling. And to my mind, that's as poetic a thing as one could be doing, is just to be looking at it and beginning to maybe get little shreds of words. It's going to take me a long time to be able to say anything about it that could at all light it up. You know, it's a remarkable gift. Honey, who cares? You know, it's just being with them is the wonderful part of it.
It's not a willful act, I think, gardening. And I think art is also not a willful act. There's something gifted and there's something beyond. And it can't even, yeah, it can't even be explained accurately to you, really, by all the things that try to prepare you for it. Yeah. Although I'm waiting for that bee poem, Mark. I think it's gonna
It'll happen. Yeah, I think more than one.
a hive of bee poems.
It's funny that you can't explain it, because language is so built upon gardening metaphors, the seed, what is planted, what grows, what's weeded out, what we nourish, what we reject, what bears fruit, what fails. You know, every daily speech is full of the garden, and yet it still feels like you're face to face with an example of the ultimate mystery, which is something coming apparently out of nothing and thriving, and a pattern emerging where you couldn't see anything before. You know, there's a seed and then there's this. It's creation over and over again.
And coming back after dying off too,
Yeah.
that's an amazing thing to watch.
And the surprise of it too strikes me so much. Like Mark was saying, we don't know what they're doing, and we can't even imagine into the process, you know. And I lived until recently on a few acres in a little barn here at the foot of the Santa Cruz Mountains. And when people would come visit the garden, they'd go, oh my God, there's lilac, just tremendous, you know, lilac in bloom, and the bulbs are going and all these things are happening. And I became so aware of the external impression of a garden where someone's going, oh my God, the lilacs. And then my experience walking those grounds during the day was, oops, I almost stepped on a skull. What is that? You know, gopher skull, raccoon skull? What kind of skull is this? And it was a lot about death. It was the baby birds that had fallen out of the nest and didn't make it. And that was sort of my private awareness of what was going on. And so I became more deeply aware how the garden is death and the garden is beauty. And then it's this element of surprise, of just, I don't know what it is. Once I fell asleep on that lawn by the lilacs, I dozed reading a book, and I woke up and I was eye to eye with a bobcat. And they're not, you know, dangerous to a full-size human, but you know, if a deer has fallen or something, they might get interested. And I think it was trying to suss out what state I was in, you know, and it just stayed there crouched, and I just stayed there because I actually didn't want the moment to end. You know, I thought, if I get up, this is over. They go on with their day, I go on with mine. I just want to stay in this. Kind of poised here.
Two things I learned about bees just recently. One, that if a bee discovers that it is sick, if it's infected with mites or has something which would be dangerous to the rest of the hive, it will stay out and die rather than returning to the hive.
Huh.
So nobility, self-sacrifice, generosity. And the other, this one totally blows me away. You know, when bees swarm, because there's so many of them, they need to find another home. They send out scouts who choose various sites where they might nest. And you know how they decide on which one they're going to go to? They vote. I don't know how what the process can be. I cannot imagine, but there is a group process for agreeing upon which is the best site. So, and that's not an individual intelligence. That's sort of a mind made out of that whole thriving hive. And we have something like that too, but not clearly accessible, right?
And they measure things. Have you seen those videos of the bees stretching their bodies like a chain to measure the opening or the size of a potential home? That freaks me out, that
Right.
they have this sense of measure, and then if they choose it, right, they build accordingly
Yep.
to their measurements.
They need the comb to be vertical, right, and to be geometrically perfect as it is. And they have little systems for hooking themselves together and chains of bodies in order to bring the comb down to where it needs to go. It's extraordinary.
Yes, there's a question in the chat that might give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about this book, but someone's asking, will there be a sequel to this anthology?
Oh, wow. You know, it's interesting. The fabulous Palestinian poet Vadi Judah just had a book that had, it's got ellipses on it, and it had a beautiful ode to the onion in it. And I thought, gee, I wish I had gotten that poem in time. Somebody proposed a book of chickens, a book about chicken keeping. I wonder if there's an anthology about bees in the making. I'm right now myself working on my own poems again, and that will be my next move. But I did realize that I love anthologies because I believe that poems are conversation and poems are community. And the other thing that's been really amazing is going in the poetry world, but also reading at seminaries and botanic gardens, and to audiences of people who maybe have not been to a poetry reading before, and feeling like this is poetry that people are hungry for, that speaks across some borders. You know, at a science convention, at a science museum. So that's been really, really special. And I think this idea that art is very good when it's cross-pollinating, which is, I think, a garden metaphor, is something that would stick with me. I wanted to say something about Danusha's discovery about all of the gopher skulls. The book is organized in relation to the seasons, and each of we move through the agricultural year in a sort of a loose way, with different sections for planting and sprouting, weeding and wilding, growing and tending, being and waiting. But I realized that there are other seasons, and one of them that feels really important to me is that there's a section in here for grieving. And I think that we go to poems and gardens because we ask them to hold our grief. And Danusha's other amazing poem in here is about being in a garden and having the garden be a place to think through transformation of grief and the transformation of life. And so there's also a section for reverie. I think we go to gardens just because we need a place to daydream. So it turned into sort of seasons and a few spiritual seasons of a sort. And that was really interesting. I didn't necessarily know that that was going to happen. So, yeah.
And Tess, would you like to, I've got a few more questions from the chat, but would you like to talk a little bit about the class that you're teaching?
Thank you, Meg. I am offering a very special class about writing the poetry of place, and it's actually going to be up in Rockport and Camden at the Maine Media Workshop. It's this coming September. If you happen to have a week in September free, many of us are chained to certain kind of academic schedules, but Maine in September is very glorious. And this is a class where we're going to be writing sort of in plein air. We're going to go to Monhegan Island. We're going to go also look at art at the Farnsworth Museum. I think we'll stand in front of the Marsden Hartleys and think about what it is to see a place. And I think we'll go to the Camden Rock Part Historical Society and think about the way that geology, geography, and history also help us tell stories of place. And using these different ways and lenses, we'll be generating our own poems. This is something that's very dear to my heart. I live in California, but my mother's family is actually from Waterville and actually Brunswick. So Maine is a home to me as well. And Maine as a place is a place to learn about thinking about place is really rich. And the kind of way of thinking about approaching poetry through sort of tactile research of your world and the art that inspires you to see your world is a method I think that you can take to whatever story you're trying to craft in poems, wherever you're from. So I'll put the information about that in the chat as well. And
Right.
I hope that it's okay if I also say that if you're inspired to buy this book, my local bookstore, Pegasus Books, will take your order by email and let you personalize whatever you'd like me to sign the book to. So for your mom or the gardener in your life. And they're so kind. It's really the opposite of a corporate operation. It's very smooth and wonderful and customer service oriented, but it's just very kind people responding to your email quickly. And if you're hungry for that kind of experience in a bookstore, I would say that Pegasus is great. So I'll put both of those things in the chat for sure. And then maybe we should take one more question and close with 2 poems.
That sounds lovely. So, there's a couple of questions. I don't know, Tess, there's one that's sort of to all of the poets about a line, or there's one that's generally, but asking people to which line of the poems that they read out loud spoke most to them and why. But there's also one about what you think is the difference between a good garden poem and an excellent one, or one worthy of being an anthology.
I want everyone to answer the one about the favorite line.
Great.
I'm going to say the line that's meant a lot to me during these months and that I think is both compassionate and true and haunting is the line in Naomi Shihab Nye's poem Palestine Vine, where she says, "I wasn't evil, but I wasn't careful." And this idea that maybe care is some antidote, not opposite, but something about care is a way of eating away at evil, and that maybe this care that we can give to each other moment to moment, to the earth moment to moment, is part of the way of pushing back at some of the grief and evil that is happening. When she reads that line, every time I hear that line, I kind of hold my heart. Other people, say your favorite line.
Okay, this is C.D. Wright. This is a line in her Song of the Gourd. In gardening, I thought this is it. Body and soul, I am home at last. Excelsior.
It's wonderful. This is Whitman. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles.
My favorite is also the line that Tess just mentioned. I wasn't evil, but I wasn't careful. And the next line that comes after, this is what happens in the world. There's something about the plainness of that line coming after the revelation of the beginning line that really just gets to me.
Gonna break protocol a little and do another C.D. Wright, even though that wasn't a poem I read, but I wrote down, I learned to praise the things I had dreaded.
Yes, I second all of the lines you all have been struck by, and being able to read both silently in my own home from this anthology and then being able to read some of the poems that were read tonight out loud has been just wonderful. And each time I rediscover different parts of them. So I applaud everything you all had just quoted. But I will pick from Tom Gunn's. I think this is the second or third time I've read this for your readings, Tess. But I love the last part of it, and I'm reading in the dark now. I would never have imagined the slow passion to that deliberate progress, which is describing the snail, which is not too different than a slug. And I hate slugs. They have ruined so many things in my garden, and I want to love them and I want to admire them. And they come back when they come back. And I question, why are you coming back? We've had this discussion before. I've gotten rid of you. We didn't have it much pain. Why are you deciding to come now? But every time I get to that last part of Gunn's poem, I'm reminded that there are so many things that are larger and slower than I am. And I need to hear that more and see that more often. So,
Sophie, have you ever seen When They Make Love?
no, my daughter has, though.
Unbelievable.
Select them for that.
Banana slugs will twine around each other's bodies. They'll hang on a string of something they've made, some kind of fluid. They will make a kind of caduceus, twine together, and out of their heads, little holes in their heads, will come these ice blue antlers, which are the penises. And then they because they're hermaphrodites, they wrap around each other, caress those ice blue antlers, and fertilize each other's eggs. It's utterly thrilling.
I don't believe it. You saw that on Star Trek, man.
Oh, and I was just at a craft talk with Padre Gotuma, who tells the most wonderful story about slugs. So I'll have to share it with you,
Please.
Sophie, another time. But
All of creation.
it's endearing story about slugs.
So
And-
sorry, I'm gonna end this whole discussion on a slug. But for a snail.
On that note,
Thank you for that description, Mark. That's gonna, I
Billy.
wish I'd written all that down. I'm gonna send it to my kid.
Video, I think, on YouTube.
Oh, no, not going there.
That's great. And Tess, you wanted to end with a couple of poems?
I think it's a good way to go out in the world.
Yes.
With one more poem under our
Yes.
belt. Again, what another way to support these artists is to go ahead and order their books. They're each of them wonderful. One of the beautiful things about an anthology is that you might not have read the work of Sophie Cabot Black or Kirun Kapur or Danusha Laméris, and you might want their book. And they have wonderful books in the world, and you can order them. So I just want to say that part of this is the beautiful thing of supporting the arts ecosystem as well. The arts is an ecosystem, and it is one that I believe, when it is healthy, also makes us stronger. So I'm going to leave with a very short bit of Virgil's ancient farm poem, The Georgics. I translated these few lines, and they seem important to me for a lot of reasons. And one of them is when we think about abundance and hunger and fields and soil, we could ask ourselves how many things that seem like migration or climate migration, how many things that seem like war, how many, even in our own country, things that are called misbehavior in a school might also be called hunger by a different name. So this is a little segment of Virgil's Georgics devoted to olives. Olives, by contrast, need no care. Don't call for machete or stubborn hoe. Once they've clung to the fields and bowed with the breezes, the earth which the plowshare exposed of herself offers up moist, heavy fruit. Oh, suckle the olive, fat, pleasing to peace. And at the very first reading of this book, the poet Forrest Gander made a joke that I felt like I needed to repeat every single time because it was so great. He said, "I had the great pleasure of writing this poem in the year 1818 under the pseudonym John Keats. It's not about snails, but we do get the grasshopper and the cricket. Thank you all for being here, truly. It's really just a gift to share this afternoon and evening with you. The poetry of earth is never dead. When all the birds are faint with the hot sun and hide in cooling trees, a voice will run from hedge to hedge about the new-mown mead. That is the grasshopper's. He takes the lead in summer luxury. He has never done with his delights, for when tired out with fun, he rests at ease beneath some pleasant weed. The poetry of earth is ceasing never. On a lone winter evening, when the frost has wrought a silence, from the stove there shrills the cricket's song, in warmth increasing ever, and seems to one in drowsiness half lost, the grasshoppers among some grassy hills. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Tess. Thank all of you for being here. Thank all of you who came to listen to this. You know, I'm getting so many messages about having a full heart from this evening's readings, and mine is full.
What a beautiful thing you've done here, Meg, to build this corner. It's a very big corner.
I love it. It just lets me connect with all of you. So it's a treat for me as well. So thank you.
I'm really grateful. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Tess. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.